Our speaker tonight is Dr. Todd Barkman, and he is a professor of biology, biological sciences at Western. His work covers a wide array of topics, including parasitic plant genome evolution, tropical plant taxonomy, evolution of caffeine production in plants, and population genetics of rare species in Michigan and Southeast Asia. Over the past 23 years at Western, he has taught general biology, plant systematics, and molecular biology laboratory. I know of Todd for two passions of his. One is for plants, and the other is for students. He's passionate about both. And I remember meeting with him and his plant systematics class and Steve Cato on a hillside on Howard Street, just above the Western campus, where the class students had discovered a stand of a rare species, a dwarf hackberry. And I watched Todd working with his students and with Steve, and the energy and the passion that he put into it, including the care that he took with the attempt to preserve a nest of voles that his students had uncovered in their digging. Todd's passion includes all of our relations. And I remember also hearing of his stand in favor of the trees down in the valley. A lot of trees were going to come down in favor of a student dining hall, and the students were demonstrating against that. And Todd said, he was quoted in the newspaper as saying, "I will stand in front of the tree cutters before I will see that happen." Well, the university, and this is rare, did back down and delayed the construction for a year while they rethought this. And so it was a partial win. I don't know whether the university made its decision on the basis of the TV publicity that might have resulted from the chainsawing of Todd Barkman. I don't know. But I think his passion for plants and for students and for student causes and for the environment are wonderful. And I think we owe Todd a debt for that passion and that kind of commitment. So I hope you will join me in welcoming this evening Dr. Todd Barkman.
Okay, let me see if I can get this microphone working satisfactorily. If you don't mind, thank you. That's what I'm inclined to do. I've learned from the best here, Mr. Cato. I just have to make sure I don't knock things over as I'm too excitedly talking about this topic. I also have to say it's fitting that we're in this room. I haven't been in this room for 20 years. The last time I was here, strangely enough, it was for a public input session that the DNR was hosting on the future of the Gordon Neck State Game Area. It was packed house. It was a very interesting set of perspectives. One of the main perspectives was that a trapper wanted to have his trails mowed by the DNR so he could get to his traps more easily. And so a lot of diverse perspectives were presented at that meeting. But it's also just wonderful that I see several people here who are going to feature prominently in this talk, including Steve Cato and Nate DeVries and Lou and Caitlin over here. And I'll highlight their contributions shortly. It's also quite an honor to be here and just to see what a vibrant group you have. So congrats to all of you for keeping this going and growing. Very important to do that. Okay, so let me see if I'm going to try to deliver on two things. I'm going to talk about a lot of gloom and doom, and then I'm not going to have any answers for any questions that I pose. Okay, so those are two promises I have for you. But my main hope is that we generate some discussion and maybe together figure out some answers to questions or what fruitful next steps this project could take. Okay, so to begin, here's the first gloom and doom slide that our colleague Tyler Bassett provided. So you can read the headlines. Nearly a quarter of the species of native plants in our state are in some state of vulnerability, or are already gone. So here you can see a total of 448 plant species are vulnerable in our state. That includes those 114 that are merely special concern at this point. So those, of course, don't have any legal protection. But there's a number of threatened, endangered species, as well as those extirpated ones. But the main thing I want to show, though, then on this slide is you'll see on the right our lovely mitten, and wherever you see a black dot, that's a hot spot for rare species. And I think you'll see in a slightly non-random way that Southwest Michigan's got a lot of dots. And Gordonick State Game Area right outside our door here is one of those hot spots. Of course, so is our entire county. So here's a wonderful map the MNFI and in collaboration with others, and produced about the pre-settlement vegetation of our county. And you can see the various colors, yellow being prairie, the distribution of prairie in our county. And we've got beech maple forest and, of course, abundant oak savanna and oak hickory forest types. But that was 200 years ago. Today, this is approximately what we've got to deal with. So according to MNFI data sheets, less than 0.1% of our prairie, savanna, and oak hickory forest types still exist, at least in non-disturbed contexts. And so I tried to then overlay what would that mean for our county. So I went back to the previous map, counted up all the pixels that were prairie, and all of the prairie of our county would fit in this not so small red box. That's how much prairie used to be in our county. What does 0.1% of that look like? I'm not sure the people in the back can see anything but a red dot or square right there. That's all that would be left, best case scenario. Oak hickory forest, about the same, at least in terms of remnant or pre-settlement community types. Of course, there's, at least for oak hickory, abundant secondary regrowth. So, of course, we still are pretty well forested in many areas, and you can see Fort Custer there. Well, as a result of loss of community types, that, of course, means then loss of species and populations of species. And so, first and foremost, or one of the ones I like to show our students is this guy here on the left. This is compass plant, of course, and it used to occur in our county and no longer does, at least where it did originally. And then, well, you can see blue-eyed Mary, and those guys luckily still do occur in our county. But if you peruse Dwayne McKenna's treatment for the flora of Kalamazoo County, you can see that by his estimates, at least 40 species no longer occur here that used to. And we've got plenty of herbarium specimens to prove that they used to occur here. And then quite a few are then if they are still extant, are probably in trouble. In other words, there's one or few populations left of them. Okay, so that's a little bit of gloom and doom. Now let me turn this into ecology class for a second. So if you care about populations, one thing you'd like to know is, if you have a population today, will the population size increase over time, or will it possibly decrease over time? There are many, many factors that can affect that. And so we're going to talk about some of those today, not all of these, obviously. But in this, what I find to be a rather seminal work by Doug Shemsky and colleagues, they set out a framework to think about this, such that there's these dotted lines that explain genetic factors that can affect population growth over time. And then these solid lines, which are purely ecological factors that could affect population growth over time. And so, not to go, I don't want to enumerate all of those factors, but what I do want to focus on is what we might call the demography of populations. And I'll break that down in a much more simpler way on the next slide. I'm going to try to make this sound fancy, but it's all quite simple, okay? If we consider individuals and populations, what affects the number of individuals that we might see in the population later? Well, adults have to survive, number one. And so in this slide, you'll see that there's some rate at which adults survive or don't. That's one factor. Population size is also changed because adults do one thing. In addition to surviving, they reproduce at some rate over time. They make some number of offspring. Those seeds then either germinate or they don't and become seedlings. Seedlings then survive or not, and then some will transition to becoming young adults, I guess you might say. Or if these were trees that we were talking about, they would become saplings. Saplings then survive at some rate, and then some saplings become adults, and then they contribute to reproduction within the population. So by my estimate, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 parameters to think about. 7 pretty simplistic parameters to consider, and I'm going to take you through an example looking at all those here momentarily. Of course, we have to thank our mathematician friends for this part. What you do with those numbers then is a little bit of matrix algebra, and you'll come up with an answer. Okay, so we'll show some squiggly lines here in a second. Okay, as an example, and this is the kind of study that really has captured my imagination and got me excited over the years. Using those parameters, we can predict whether populations are likely to persist over time or go extinct over time. And these folks in this publication were really interested in an astragalus that occurs in a pretty heavily traveled national park. And they found that trampling was really affecting this rare astragalus species. And so their estimate of all those 7 parameters suggested that in the next 100 years, there will be no more astragalus at that site. Then they introduced a bunch of interventions. Mostly they closed off areas where the plants were getting trampled, and those 7 parameters changed, mostly for the better. And it looks like the population size, as shown by this line, is at least likely to stay stable for the next 100 years. So I've wondered, could we do this here in Kalamazoo for some of our rare populations? So you'll see the application of this that myself and others have done in collaboration to study rattlesnake master. So here's the distribution of Eryngium yuccifolium, or rattlesnake master, in the U.S. And you can see that it's probably globally secure at this point. But you can also see that it did range into Michigan, and still is here in Michigan, thank goodness. In Michigan, it is restricted just to the southwest-most counties. And at least historically speaking, these were the numbers of populations in each of those counties. So 31 in total. I guess that sounds like a lot. Of course, thanks to Tyler for providing the most updated numbers here from Michigan Natural Features Inventory, a database. These are hot off of his keyboard. What we can see now is of those 31 that were tracked, historically speaking, it looks like we're down to 11. And of those 11, then you can see the approximate sizes of those populations. So one population with an estimate of 15 individuals in that population. Looks like Van Buren stacks up the best. The highest number of rattlesnake master individuals are found there. One caveat about these population sizes is that plants are annoying. And oftentimes, one plant will produce multiple stems. And so it's really hard to know how many individuals are in a site. But at any rate, you can just take these stem numbers as higher certainly can't be worse. Okay, well, with such a dire situation for this species in our state, I can't help but get a little bit concerned. If there weren't any in Kalamazoo County, I'm not sure I don't know what I would do if I would drive to neighboring counties to work on this. But since we've got this guy in our backyard, I can't let people know, oh yeah, there used to be rattlesnake master here in Portage, but there isn't anymore because I didn't do anything. I don't want that to be the case. So here's the kind of things that we're doing in these next slides. I'll show you. And in fact, of course, it used to be there used to be 13 populations in our wonderful county. We're down to 1. Here's one of those. Here's a specimen from one of those that used to grow. Richard Brewer, if he were here, he would might shed some tears because these individuals were collected from the corner of Stadium Drive and Howard, where there was a wet prairie historically speaking, and so we've got proof that it used to occur there anyway. Okay, so here's the story. Here's where things begin for us. A few years ago, there were specimens in our herbarium for where this occurred. You can't just walk out to the Gordon Neck State Game Area and find the 3 individuals left of a population. So I was fortunate enough to connect with Chad Hewson, who knew of where these plants occurred. So he took me out there, and this is what we saw. I don't know if any of you cultivate rattlesnake master, but those are some pretty terrible looking rattlesnake master plants, okay? But at any rate, we sought then to study these 7 parameters and see what's the problem with this population. Why isn't it increasing in size? So first thing we realized was they don't look great, and other people have suggested that if they call it button Eryngium, by the way, if it's in a shadier environment, it's going to look like that. And we reasoned if we lose the adults, there will be no population. So we sought to try to understand what could be affecting the survival of those adults. Well, when we went out to the site, this is what we saw. We were looking at the plants, we turned around and we saw a wall of glossy buckthorn. So that had to go. Fortunately, Lou Mitchell is super talented with a brush cutter. So he went in and started cleaning house, and eventually that's what it looked like. And the next year, by golly, look how perky those rattlesnake masters looked. Okay, so we thought we were onto something there. So then we said, adult survival is great, but these guys have to reproduce. It's that red arrow producing seeds, what we call fecundity of individuals that we really need to study and understand. And so Lou and I would always go out in the afternoon and things looked great and sunny. And then we went out one morning and realized, wow, no wonder these guys aren't reproducing. They're only getting sun half the day. And so Don Poppy, who's one of my favorite people in the world, allowed us to go out and clean up a bit more. Fortunately, Lou's a certified arborist, there were trees harmed for this study, okay? So here's Lou. I don't know if people back there can see this, but this was a monster black oak. And it did hurt both of us to have to cut that down, but it eventually did go down. And by golly, you won't believe, but sure enough, these guys started blooming. So light is therefore beneficial for adult survival and for reproduction of rattlesnake master. No big surprises. So although the individuals were flowering, that flowering doesn't mean that you're going to get seeds, of course. And one of our problems was there was one clump, and only one clump, blooming in the first year of our work. Now, if you've ever tried to cross or self-pollinate tobacco plants or potato plants, those guys don't breed with themselves. They're self-incompatible. Fortunately, it's reported that rattlesnake master does have some degree of self-compatibility. So we had hope that even if these three stems were from the same individual, that we might get some offspring. There are reports of seed predation by lepidopterans, and so we were worried about even if seeds were produced, would they all be eaten? Well, luckily there were seeds produced. So the red arrow's looking good for this population. So that so now we have to seek to understand, well, why isn't it increasing in size if the adults are surviving and they're reproducing and they're making seeds? Okay, herein where starts the story where we had to ask for permission to do everything else that I'm going to talk about, because of course this is a state threatened species. So fortunately at that time, Lori Sargent and now Casey Wrights gave us permission to do this work, so we were allowed to then take some of those seeds, go to the greenhouse, and work with them. All right, so the one thing we wanted to do was understand the biology and not mistake the biology because of our lack of expertise. And so when I was fortunate at WMU at the time to be able to call in the expertise of someone here in the audience, Mr. Cato, who I think is wearing the same shirt as he is. And so if we're going to collect seeds of some of the last remaining Kalamazoo individuals, the last thing I wanted to do was not treat them right. And so luckily we were able to call on Steve Cato, who in collaboration with Chris Jackson, our greenhouse manager, treated these things to the proper stratification and length of cold exposure and subsequent conditions such that, by golly, we got some seedlings. So whether they're selfed or whether those were three separate individuals blooming, I don't know, but they were able to make some babies. To our surprise, 2 babies showed up outdoors too. So I will say, for the permit, we were only allowed to take a small proportion of the seeds produced so that the rest would stay there and hopefully do exactly what they did. The one thing we did notice, though, was there was a lot more seedlings. There were a lot more seedlings produced in the greenhouse than were produced outdoors. So I think we're finding one of the weak links here is in this seed to seedling transition. The seeds aren't happy about something out at that site. Of course, there's precedent in the literature for that as well, and so it has been suggested that a little bit of fire is what seedlings of rattlesnake master really like best. So after this, I'm going to be begging Don Poppy and Nate DeVries to burn a little bit out there in Gourd Neck, so that hopefully we can increase the number of seeds becoming seedlings. Okay, with seedlings in hand, the next question is, will they survive outdoors? Or is this the reason we're not seeing more adults? Is because seeds do germinate into seedlings, but then seedlings never survive or never grow into adults. We didn't know, so we took those seedlings and then planted them outside. for this work, I was fortunate enough to collaborate with Lou again and Caitlin Renahan to put out the seedlings in a manner in which we could track them over time. And so this is then going to allow us to understand the rate at which seedlings stay seedlings, or survive, in other words. And here's what we found. So there were no seedlings in 2019, but in 2020 we planted about 14 seedlings. That's as many as we had from that first year. And you can see not all of them survived, but 9 have survived for 3 years running now. And so we're pretty hopeful. So apparently seedlings don't hate the site that much. The next stage to consider then is will any of these seedlings become young adults, or saplings, for lack of a better word in this particular case? And then will those saplings survive? Well, you may have to have me back in a couple of years. These guys are pretty slow growers, but we have had 2 individuals become what we would call saplings. And we use an arbitrary definition here of they had to have more than 10 leaves and have a span of 10 inches or more to be called a sapling. So 2 individuals, 2 seedlings, 2 of those 9 have become saplings. And our real problem, though, is no seedling that's become a sapling has then become a reproductive adult. We're still waiting, but maybe 2024 will be the year. Okay, so now going back to this mathematical model, we've estimated the rate at which adults survive, the rate at which they reproduce and how much they reproduce, seed germination rates, seedling survival rates, seedling to sapling transitions, sapling survival rates, and this is still our big unknown. With all those numbers, do a little number crunching, and this is what I can show you. Our population today is 3 individuals, and in 50 years, it's still going to be 3 individuals, because apparently no one's ever going to become a new adult. Well, that's pretty dissatisfying, isn't it? So the good thing about numbers and computations is you can explore what might happen. And so if one allows for the sapling or young adult to reproductive adult transition to be 1%, that doesn't seem like that's asking too much. We could see that in 50 years, the population might increase. So next year, we are going to be watching those saplings. And if you see someone out there with a fertilizer can, it might be me. Okay. Now, the thing about numbers, of course, is there's always some uncertainty. And so these simulations then were run assuming a wide array of possibilities in terms of sapling to adult transition rates. But even though we feel pretty good about our estimates for some of these transitions, we have no clue about that one. Well, under a wide range of possibilities, this is what you can see. Sadly, there's only 2 cases where things look quite good in 50 years. In the rest of the cases, modest growth at best. So sadly, I think the future is still uncertain for Rattlesnake Master out at Gordon Neck State Game Area. But by golly, we still have these three adults to put our hope in. And we were especially excited 2 years ago because all 3 of them bloomed at the same time. So finally, there was a possibility for some degree of cross-pollination. These may be brothers and sisters, I don't know. But nonetheless, it's probably better than having seedlings all produced from one mom. Okay. So our burning question here really is, what's limiting seed to seedling transitions in the field? Because we left hundreds of seeds out there 2 years ago, maybe thousands, and there were no seedlings to show. I think part of it might be that there's so much vegetation, it's hard to see them. So again, if someone could burn that site for us, we would at least be able to see things more clearly. So nobody in this room better call the fire department if they see smoke arising over Gordneck State Game Area, okay? All right, so the second case study I just want to talk a little bit about is that of Coreopsis palmata, and I won't take you through the gory details as I've illustrated for Rattlesnake Master, but I'll merely show you the few things that we've learned in this case. So here for Prairie Coreopsis, or Coreopsis palmata as it's known, here are the historical localities. Again, look at Kalamazoo County. Was the hotspot for Coreopsis palmata. Here, thank you to Tyler again, here are the latest data according to MNFI database, and this was fairly systematically surveyed by Tyler and Brad Slaughter a few years ago. And so now you can see one county where there is no more Coreopsis palmata, and Kalamazoo County is not looking great. Nonetheless, we do have a population reproducing. So here, not unlike Rattlesnake Master, can you guys see the Coreopsis palmata population here? This is one of the historical Kalamazoo populations at its best. I guess there's one stem right there, lanky, very shaded. Turns out if you've got friends that really like chainsaws and brush cutters, you can clear the way. And so that individual the next year was reproductive. It's still not looking great, mind you, but you give these guys a little bit of light and they do seem to respond. One of the challenges with this particular population is it's not in a setting where our DNR friends will let us do whatever we want to do. And so there are challenges in this way, because if Nate DeVries would have had his way, there would be no more trees along 12th Street near Center, okay? All right, so where there are blooms, of course, there could be seeds. And so Coreopsis palmata is reported to be self-incompatible. So when we had these few individuals blooming, we were pretty unsure whether there would be fruits produced, and if there were fruits, if the seeds would be viable. Nonetheless, when we sprinkled these in the seed germination trays, at night Steve Cato comes in with a little bit of magic powder, and he sprinkles it over the trays, and up pop these seedlings. A few observations we made were curious, though. Some seedlings looked great and darted off immediately. Others, the first true leaves came out white, and that was the end of the plant. So apparently some mutation related perhaps to chlorophyll accumulation in certain seedlings. Does that suggest that there's parents in the population carrying deleterious alleles? It might. There were a few other strange phenotypes that we saw. So here are a bunch of Coreopsis palmata seedlings doing what they do, going for the sun. And this little fella stayed rather shrunken its whole life. So I'm not sure, again, in this case, if there's other deleterious alleles in these populations that are still being carried by the parents found there, the few parents that still exist there. Nonetheless, we've gotten pretty darn good germination of Coreopsis palmata, although it has varied considerably over the years. I will point out that at this particular site, what do I want to say? There was management in 2019. Not surprisingly, then I guess we saw an increase in the number of seeds that would then germinate from parents on those sites. And then no management's happened since 2019, so last year was pretty miserable. We'll see what this year looks like. But in a good year like 2020, these guys want to grow. And really the good news here is even for this single seedling that we got our first year out at this site, seedling survival was high and it became reproductive 2 years later. So these guys are not wasting time. Okay, well, so to conclude, then I just want to I hope I've convinced you that breaking down population demography into these various transition states could provide insight that would help us strategize how to manage our remaining rare populations here in Kalamazoo County and beyond. And that hopefully you've been convinced that even with limited data, the modeling will allow us to predict what population futures are like. Those models get much, much better with more data. So we're continuing to survey those populations and track those transition rates. Aside from demography, there are other issues to consider, of course, and I know this group thinks a lot about genetics, and we could certainly have conversations about that. And certainly genetics do play a role in long-term population persistence. But finally, the main conclusion I've come to after all these years is after watching my dear friend Tyler Bassett have to go to sites only to see species decline, see populations go extinct, is that while we're good at documenting the loss of biodiversity, we're not so good at preserving what's left of our biodiversity. So it would be really great if there was a branch of our government, our state government, that was concerned with not just tracking population decline, but doing something about it. Finally, I'll just acknowledge the folks that have helped with all this work and helped prop me up over all the years. Tyler Bassett with Michigan Natural Features Inventory. We're so proud of him and all that he's doing and has done thus far. Lou and Caitlin have been invaluable partners to me throughout this project, and as have other members of the WMU Bio Club. The Bio Club was instrumental in preserving the Valley Forest at WMU. DNR has been amazing partners. Don Poppy and Nate DeVries never say no. If you've got a good idea, they will help facilitate. And so Allegan State Game Area, I hope you all realize it's palpable the effect those folks are having on that natural area, and Allegan as well. At WMU, Chris Jackson's been a wonderful partner at the greenhouse and has really helped carry the native plant propagation project on for years. And Steve Cato, who's no longer with WMU Landscape Services, was a transformational force in my life, and so I really want to thank you, Steve. Your partnership's been very dear to me. DNR, of course, provided permission for us to do our work. City of Portage, Jamie Harmon facilitated our work with one of the Coreopsis palmata sites. I thank Chad for taking me to find those rare buggers, and then my wife has been tolerant and has accompanied me on much of this work as well. So with that, I thank all of you for your attention. I'd love to have a conversation.
So if we have people with questions, we're going to ask you to speak into the microphone so that we can capture it for the recording also. You want to start, Marie?
I have a population of rattlesnake master in my yard. If you would be interested, I would be delighted to have you come look at them, and they're holding their own. Second, I was on the City of Portage Environmental Board when they were doing burning. I can help.
Nate, did you hear that? Well, that is super to hear, Ruth. Thank you so much. One thing that's become abundantly clear to me over the years, and Tyler probably thinks about it daily, is we know a lot about populations in public land. We have no idea as a civilization what's hiding out in people's private property. And so any information about other additional populations, remnant populations in our county or elsewhere are always welcomed, I think. So yeah, thanks. Well, okay, so does that include planted ones? Isn't that a good question? And so probably many of you were thinking about that very question when I made the claim that, let me just go back here to compass plant. I said compass plant no longer exists in our county. And everybody probably shook their head and said, yeah, it's in my yard. What are you talking about? Of course, in this case, I'm referring to remnant populations that were here prior to us becoming a state in 1837. So I think those are the populations that Tyler's most interested in, and myself as well. Right. Okay, so now comes another wonderful question. What about the seeds or the pollen from these plants growing in our gardens? Why not take, if I'm worried about this guy not having an appropriate mate, why don't I just grab some pollen from the plant in my garden? Or why don't I just grab some seeds from the plants in my garden and sprinkle them out there? If I throw 10,000 seeds out there, I would like to think there will be some seedlings. I think this really boils down to a question of one's philosophy and what the goals of your project are. And in this particular case, I think this project has the goal of trying to maintain the gene pool as diminished as it must be at this site. Once there's a couple hundred individuals there, it would be fun to see what the introduction of some new genetic material would be. Or we could collect pollen from these plants and cross with individuals from those few other remaining populations and look at offspring vigor in that case. And if they're more vigorous than the self seedlings, that would be interesting and important to know about.
See if I can get there quickly. You hold on to yours.
Oh, all right.
Hi, I've collected seeds from around old cemeteries out in the country. It's a great place around the perimeter, especially cemeteries that nobody attends to anymore. So I'd suggest start looking there. And if you need help doing that, I'd be glad to volunteer. Okay?
Wow, that sounds great. Yeah, there's I've always been enamored with the notion of our collective knowledges and what we could do if we all put our minds to the same task. I think we could achieve a lot more than obviously any one of us individually. So I'm really excited to hear about what you know. Could you please have the question restated? Or it was more of a comment.
Oh, that you can collect endangered species from around abandoned cemeteries in the country. And there's a lot of them. I mean, if you go out towards Climax and out in that way, there's a lot of them out there. And I don't think anybody's ever taken an inventory. I lived in Illinois for a while, and we started doing that. And we did high prairie, low prairie, and all sorts of stuff. And we replanted them, and they were pretty successful.
Oh, great. And I'm sure all your friends mocked you for having this fascination with cemeteries.
Hi, Todd. You said you had to get special permission to replant your seedlings back into the native population. So you're willing to bend the sort of native habitat rule for that? And who gives you the permission, and is that ordinarily done?
Well, let me just clarify. As long as we don't touch these plants, we're not breaking any rules. To then touch the plants or collect them or parts of them, we needed permission because they're protected by state law. And so we had to write a proposal and stipulate how many seeds we were going to take and then what we were going to do with the seeds. And so only the seeds from these plants were brought into the greenhouse. They were germinated, and those seedlings then were put right back out to the same site. So it was our way of trying to get at whether seeds would even germinate at all, because if you just throw a bunch of seeds outside, it's hard to know what what the germination rates are possible, germination rates are possible. And so we have, from this work, we know seeds can germinate a lot more than we might think if we just go out to the site. But yeah, we haven't introduced any new, as far as I know, any new genetic material to that site, though.
So introducing the seedlings back in is not regulated.
Though we had to have permission to do that.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
it all
In fact,
steps
I don't know. Lori Sargent probably would have given us permission to do whatever we wanted to, but we told her we were going to take a small proportion of the seeds that were produced, germinate them, nurture the seedlings, and then put the seedlings back out at the site with the goal of increasing the population size. So there's a question about what about predation. Certainly, I assumed the deer were going to munch these things to the ground. For some reason, there was one seedling that looked like it had been munched on this past year. Was it a bunny or what? I don't know who it was. It may be that if you're rare enough, you just get overlooked. It may be that there's enough other stuff to eat out at Gordon Neck State Game Area that this isn't the most delicious treat. I don't know, but knock on wood, herbivory's been pretty minimal. Yeah, it's really sad to see the young shoots get eaten, because then there's all of the leaves show that.
Can you repeat it so that we get it?
Okay, so the question here was one of whether the lack of predation on the herbivores is possibly having a negative effect on the plant populations. Yeah, so I mean, you're getting into ecology 101 here, or 301, whatever. So there are there are top-down controls on population growth, and so it may well be that if we were to control the predators of the herbivores, the plant populations might do better than they currently are. We don't have any evidence at this site anyway that herbivory is the problem.
So I work for the Southwest Michigan Land Conservancy. I'm gonna add to that, and deer absolutely do kill a lot of the native plants. That's why on a lot of our preserves we have deer hunts to control the population, and so far it's worked pretty well.
Yep, I mean, I see just about everyone in here nodding their heads about this one. Certainly in general, herbivores have an effect on plant population growth rate. Absolutely. We've been fortunate, and just don't tell the deer, okay? But we've been fortunate that they haven't impacted this population yet. Looks like the microphone's going to make its way over to the right side of the room here.
So it sounds like we would increase the odds of increasing the population of palmata and Eryngium with better restoration projects or practices. I'm kind of shocked that Gordon Neck doesn't burn. They just don't do that, right? It's kind of really surprising, right?
There's definitely been fire at Gordon Neck in the past. This particular site would make some people pretty uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because of its proximity to non-game area properties. Gordon Neck is such a fascinating state game area. It's interdigitated with the city of Portage, with people's private residences, and it's just a fascinating spot. But it's one that Nate and Don are doing a great job of raising the profile of.
And then the palmata population, I know I won't disclose where the western population is, but if we could do some, I know you mentioned removing buckthorn, on that hill, and I could get a crew out there next week. We should, if we could do, and if
Let's talk.
yeah, right.
Let's talk. Yeah. It turns out not everybody's got the same priorities as we all do. So when I meet with certain folks on campus who could do what you're describing, that doesn't rise to the top of their list of things to do. It turns out that people don't like dandelions in the lawn at WMU. So there's a lot more complaints about that than there are buckthorn on the hillside. So maybe if we could get all the donors to WMU to complain about the buckthorn, we wouldn't have any problems. But right now it's dandelions, okay?
Yeah. And then last thing, so I know a lot of people here buy their plants from Chad, and if his plants are coming to the seeds from that population, I mean, this is just me with high hopes thinking we are spreading these Eryngiums and palmata. I know his are definitely coming from some of those in yards, and so with that, with this group in specifically has that in mind, of what can we do? That's what I'm thinking. Like, what can we do with this problem? And I don't know. I don't know if Chad's are they from these sources? Yeah, you would know. Yeah.
I mean, it's a great question, and I don't, I'm sure everyone keeps good records of where their seeds came from. Yeah. One question then becomes, though, if you've got germplasm from multiple different areas, then what do you actually have in your nursery 5 years or 10 years later? I don't know. Do we even need to be concerned about it? I don't know. These are great questions. And again, they tend to be more philosophical than anything else. But we're taking this, as you can tell, quite a conservative approach here, just so that we can understand the system. Once we understand the system, then maybe we can investigate some other sort of perturbations that might allow us to understand other things about it. But yeah, please keep cultivating your local species and your local genotypes of those species, please.
Thank you. Yes, my question was related to Mike's last question. With animals, if you have such a small population, you get inbreeding. You want to bring in what Mike was talking about, other lines of the same species. So is it different with plants? I mean, these are such small numbers that we're talking about here.
Yeah, so that's such an interesting question. The question's about, should we let these three possibly brothers and sisters be mating with each other? And I mean, in this case, it's the same plant producing its own offspring. So there's a couple answers I have for that. One point is that populations that inbreed do have a way of purging, to use the parlance, purge their deleterious alleles, or their genetic load, as it's called. And so in other words, if brothers and sisters do mate, a lot of their offspring may end up dying because they've combined two deleterious alleles. But the ones that survive have the alleles that it takes to survive. And so if this population was inbreeding for the last 200 years, there might not be that much inbreeding depression or genetic load left. We don't know. But again, since we saw good seed germination, I feel like the genes aren't that bad. And the seedlings are surviving. Will all the seedlings peter out and none of them achieve reproductive maturity? I don't know, but I'm hopeful. But yeah, absolutely, we would. I think, again, and you'll see me being biased towards a conservative approach, I think in the future we would like to get pollen from other sites and, at least in a controlled manner, cross them to see if we can see improvements. And if we see huge improvements, it will be hard not to promote some degree of outcrossing from these other populations. Presumably, 300 years ago, there were more or less continuous populations of rattlesnake master between here and Van Buren County, and individuals were exchanging genes. And so it's only natural for us to perhaps intervene and mimic that, but maybe in a few years. Right.
Any last questions?
Did you have a question, Tom?
Maybe one more.
Is there enough information for us to ask the state to pursue legislation to protect these populations?
Maybe I live in a box, but I don't know how the state can't want to do that. Yeah, I mean, let's just go back to the numbers here real quick. When you do the math here, I don't know how you can't be a little bit concerned. And so, yeah, if you can talk to somebody who could introduce legislation and, heaven forbid, rate taxes more, so that we could form a unit of our government that would be responsible for doing something about these population declines, I think that would be the greatest thing that's happened in my lifetime.
Is there enough progress with the population decline for us to understand scientifically how to do it? I mean, what you're talking about is still a lot of trial and error. And so do we just need to develop more? Do we need state funding to have more documentation of these sort of things across the state? Or how can we do that?
What people have spent a lot of time developing theory and studying population size changes in more controlled settings and maybe in more amenable systems. These are the worst systems to try to study this in. And most of the models assume you're working with an annual plant, a plant that most of the modeling and studies have been done on annuals. And so long-lived perennials throw monkey wrenches into the whole theory. So do we know enough? I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not a population ecologist by training, but I don't think there's anyone that I'm aware of that could walk into some site and know exactly what needs to be done. I mean, aside from controlling invasives and then and for these light hogs, open up the site or burn the site. But Tyler, do you?
Generally know how to manage them. Yeah, we know these places need to be managed. That's not the bottleneck of understanding, and we can know more about the fate of these populations. That those data are really hard to keep up with because there's so many populations. So there's always more that can be done there. In terms of the protection, I mean, the reason why Todd needed a permit is because rattlesnake master is a state endangered species that has legal protection. The hard part is enforcing those laws. And in this case, the law is being enforced because Todd went to the agency that enforces it and asked permission and got that permit. And because he got that permit, now there's a paper trail of what's going on with that specific population. And that's sort of the purpose behind all that. But so there are bits and pieces of all that, and all of what I think I heard you said or say. But yeah, the laws are there. They can always be enforced and promoted more doggedly, for sure.
And I hope I didn't make anyone feel, or I hope I did not make it sound like there isn't great management being done. Quite the contrary. Again, what Nate DeVries does on a daily basis is fabulous. Okay, and so thank goodness there's still a population of Cypripedium candidum in Kalamazoo County, because a year prior I didn't think there was.
Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming down to the Portage District Library tonight to participate in Kalamazoo Wildlands programs. Thank you, Todd Barkman, so much for being here with us tonight and enlightening us. There is one more Kalamazoo Area Wild Ones event that's happening in December. That is Pints and Plants on December 14th at Brewery Outre. That's downtown. There's information on Facebook, and we'll make sure it gets on the website as well if you're interested in joining us. We've had between 30 and 45 people out chatting, talking about native plants. It has been fantastic. I highly recommend it. And then we will see you in January for the next Wild Ones program. Thank you so much.